Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Actually, it's the second time that Clementine invited me. The first time was in 2017, and then she said, well, but you have to do your presentation in French. And that was the moment that I felt completely silent. But happily enough, we were able to deliver a patient advocate who was speaking, well, not natively French, but she could do the talk. But Clementine never ever quit. So when I met her in Toulouse this summer, which was a remarkable evening, I had dinner with 6 women, and I thought it was because of me. But I made a mistake. It was France who was having a football match against, I don't even know the country, but they won. And the moment that they won, we had to stop our discussions because there was so much noise on the street. And well, finally, of course, you became world championship. So thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you very much that you will listen to my English instead of someone who is good in French. My name is Peter Kapitein. My journey started in 2005 when I was diagnosed with a lymphoma. And in 2006, I thought it was a good idea to raise funds for cancer research. So together with a good friend of mine, I started an event to climb up a very huge mountain. And well, if you know the Netherlands, that means that you have to leave your country. So we went to France and we climbed up Mount Alpe d'Huez in the Alps. And we thought it was a good idea to do that on one day 6 times. And in 2006 we were with 66 bike riders and we climbed up Mount Alpe d'Huez and we raised 350,000 euros for cancer research. And we thought it was a good success, so we repeated it in 2007 and it became an even bigger success, so we raised 1 million, and then a year after 3, 6, 12, 20, and in 2012 we raised in 1 year with 8,200 bike riders on Mount Alpe d'Huez a little more than 32 million euros. What came out of a crazy idea to raise funds by climbing up Mount Alpe d'Huez on one day 6 times became the biggest fundraising event, at least in Europe. And in the years from 2008, 9, 10, we realized that for research you need money, but it's much more important, well, it's also important that you know how to spend the money. And that is why we founded in 2010, 2011, Inspire2Live. Inspire2Live was from the beginning an organization that connects patients, researchers and clinicians. And I was used to that since 2006, 2007 to do that, but I did it on my own. And, well, you can do a lot of work on your own, but you can do a lot more with 10, 20, 30, 40 patient advocates. When we raised that 350,000 euros in 2006, the director of the Dutch Cancer Institute said to me, why don't you come up with an idea to spend that money? And I thought, okay, well, but probably I need a researcher or a doctor to have some discussion what is important for patients. So I gave a phone call to a clinician, and a couple of weeks or months later I was at a table with a clinician and he invited a researcher, and that felt completely normal. Having a discussion as a patient with researchers, clinicians, discussions about the topic, what is important for cancer patients? Well, lots of things, thousands of things are important for cancer patients, and you only have 350,000 euros. But we came up with an idea to spend the money on cancer rehabilitation. Well, like I said, we raised 1 million, 3, 6, so you can have a lot of discussions. What should we finance in research in cancer? And like I said, from the beginning on, it felt completely normal. but it was on my own, and in 2011 we started with Inspire2Live, and we realized, of course, that cancer will not be solved in the Netherlands alone. So we started a journey in 2010 with hopping on the plane and visiting scientists in France, in the UK, in the United States, in Spain, everywhere. And to make a good start, we started with 3 Nobel Prize winners in 1 week. And I know how to network, so I said to a scientist in the Netherlands, well, I have no Nobel Prize winner in my cell phone, but you probably have. And he said, yeah, I can introduce you to, that was Harold Farmers, and the other one was Paul Nurse. And it's not to brag about these names, but the funny thing is that sending them an email and say, hey, we are Inspire2Live, we have a brilliant idea, and we'd like to discuss that with you, got an immediate response from, well, you're most welcome. And Harold Farmers and Paul Nurse were at that moment both working in New York, so we bought a ticket to New York. And a friend of us said, is it good when I join you? And he said, well, the invitation is for Eric and me, so you can't join us. I said, but what if I deliver an appointment with James Watson? And we thought, well, everybody knows James Watson. So. Yeah, if you can make an appointment with Jim Watson, then you can join us. Because we thought, well, that will never succeed. So the next day he said, well, we have an appointment with Jim Watson. That was such a crazy idea. When we were there, we realized ourselves that he's a little bit over the top. But the idea of sitting there, having discussions with researchers about what should we do to get cancer under control. Cancer is always the topic of Inspire2Live. That idea was beautiful from the beginning, and we set up a program plan. I'm a project manager, so everything has to be in a project plan, otherwise I don't understand it and I don't know what to do next day. And we said, it's a good idea to ask a lot of other researchers, is this a good program plan to get cancer under control? So we flew to different countries and we visited scientists, and we always asked, is it a good plan, and who should we ask next time? And they all came up with names and names, and we have so many we've met so many researchers. But something was lacking. And that is that you can have good discussions, but you need to act. And I met a guy called Joep Lange. It's a funny story about how I met him. It was on a Saturday that when there was a celebration of World AIDS, and that was not in the Netherlands at that moment, but each year we have a celebration of AIDS, the get-together in the Netherlands, and there was Joep Lange, and I was next to him on the stage, and we both thought, we said that later on, let's give that presentation and get immediately out of this room. And that was not because of the audience, but it was because we both were pretty drunk the night before. So we thought, well, we'll leave the room in 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but we left the room at 7 in the evening and had such a beautiful talks. And that was the moment that we decided to build a congress together. And Ilona is in the room. Ilona and I and Joep Lange and his partner Jacqueline van Tongeren had meetings every 6 to 8 weeks, I think, for a year and a half to build a congress. Until July 17, 2014, when the MH17 crash took place and we lost 2 good friends. But of course we did that congress. But Joep also said, I think you should meet ACT UP. And you better start with a good documentary, and the documentary is How to Survive a Plague. And when you become a member, a patient advocate at Inspire2Live, I always say, first look at How to Survive a Plague. And if you think it's a good documentary, well, you're probably a good patient advocate. If you think it's a lousy documentary, you don't belong at Inspire2Live. And what you learn from that documentary, if you did not see him, I can immediately recommend. It's now on YouTube, so you can watch it on YouTube. What you see in that movie is what you just told us. And there are a couple of beautiful moments in it. And one of the most beautiful ones is an interview with Tony Fauci. Tony Fauci was at that moment head of virology at the NIH, and he still is. And in that interview, Fauci said, these guys were absolutely right. We let the researchers do the research they thought was necessary, instead of sitting together at the table on an equal base, having discussions what research is needed. I learned a lot from that documentary. We at Inspire2Live learned a lot from that documentary. And of course, we learned a lot from Joep Lange, and because I put together that Congress in Amsterdam, January 2015, we learned a lot from the AIDS activists. We learned a lot from Peter Staley. We thought it was a good idea to invite Peter Staley together with Larry Kramer. He founded ACT UP in the United States. So Peter Staley said, well, I can't make it at your conference, I have other things, and so, but it's a pity that I can't make it. Well, like Clementine, never ever quit. So he said, why don't we set up a video conference with you, so you can. And he was interviewed by one of our patient advocates at that moment, and an amazing guy. And what we learned from them, of course, what we learned is that you have to have these discussions about the research, the treatments, and yes, the industry has that dualism of being an enemy and a friend together. But what we learned was make that combination of emotions and arguments. And what is the combination of emotions and arguments? The emotions for the AIDS activist was, of course, that they were all dead in 1 or 2 years. And we have more or less the same, not for cancers like I have lymphoma. Most of the patients will survive lymphoma, most of the patients will survive breast cancer. But talking about glioblastoma or pancreatic cancer is kind of a death penalty. So the emotions bring you that persistence that you need to never ever quit and not think in disappointments. At Inspire2Live, we're allowed to be disappointed for 5 seconds. And then you have to rethink and answer that question. Okay, this didn't work. What will work next? And arguments is also what you said. Do your work based on research, on science, on knowledge and facts. And if you emphasize both, you have a much bigger chance of surviving. You have a much bigger chance of doing research that has added value to society, to patients, to the citizens. I owe my life to science. I was diagnosed with a lymphoma. I had several treatments, but in the end, I needed bone marrow transplant. And that's basically the reason that I'm still alive. Good science delivered a bone marrow transplant, which was a big success. It took 4 years to survive. And in the end, on September 3rd, 2008, I got that bone marrow transplant. So the combination of emotions and arguments is what we learned from ACT UP. And what do we do with it now? Our game is pretty simple, combinations of patients, researchers and clinicians. And out of these combinations came, let me give an example. One of the best fundamental researchers on pancreatic cancer, which is pretty hopeless so far, is Dave Tuveson. And Dave Tuveson was for 6 weeks, 2.5 days, visiting patients with pancreatic cancer. And in 2014 he said, well, Peter, what do you think is the most important thing these patients have to deal with? besides the fact that they're all dead in 1.5 years? Pain. And nobody's doing research on pain. We all do research on how can we extend their life? Will there be a drug that will extend their life? And yes, there is a drug that extends their life for 2 months. So we give them Volvirox, or we give them gemcitabine. We extend their life for 2 months, and then they die because of the pain. They need so much tranquilizers that they all choose to die instead of living as a... Nobody's doing research on pain, and listening to patients, you do other things. Maybe you do also the things that you now do, but you also do other things. So that combination is very powerful. We work now on setting up, we call it a discovery network, and that will take place in Boston. And in Boston, patients, researchers, clinicians come together in 3 areas: target therapies, immunotherapy, and specialists in the metabolism. In the discussions that we had in the past 2 or 3 years, we asked them, do you think, you know so much about genetics, do you think that the metabolism is important for DNA defects? And they all say, yeah, that is absolutely, that's important. And you as a specialist in immunotherapy, do you think that metabolism is important for the immune system? Oh, definitely, definitely. Do you ever talk to someone who is a specialist in the metabolism? No. Some of them do. So we thought, what do you think of the idea of bringing you together with specialists in other areas? And the guys and girls that we invited all are very enthusiastic. So it's February 15, 16 and 17, we have a meeting with 16 specialists in these 3 areas, bring them together and deliver. I mean, having a nice weekend talking about science that you will probably never do is not what we are aiming for. So you have to deliver. In the end, we start on a Friday evening. We use it for agenda setting, introduction agenda setting. Then on Saturday we work, and on Sunday we build an action plan to deliver. And the fun thing is that if you invite these people, some of them ask for, what's the agenda? And then most of the time I said, there isn't. And what are we going to do? I don't know. And most of the time then comes the most important question, why should I come? So now I got you. If we bring together this group, patients, researchers, clinicians, in a weekend, what do you think? They are not going to spend their time with unimportant things. So that Friday evening will be, of course, first introduction, but then they start discussing what needs to be done. And after 3 or 4 hours, we have that agenda for, okay, tomorrow we're going to work on A, B, C, and D. And on Sunday we know what to do. It's as simple as that. And there's a difference between simple and easy. It's pretty simple to climb up Mount Alpe d'Huez on one day 6 times. You hop on your bike, you climb up the mountain, you descend, and that you do 6 times, which is pretty simple. It's not easy. So it's, the thought behind it is probably simple, but we're all very busy in our daily work and don't know how to break out. Well, it helps if you see why you do your work. Ilona was employed by the Central Bank of the Netherlands. We both work at the Central Bank of the Netherlands, and she was employed by me in 1996. It's a long time ago. I was working on a big IT project, and suddenly there was a little girl with brown curly hair in my room, and I said, hey, what are you here for? Well, you need people to write software. what's your education? And she said to me, well, I'm a molecular biologist by education. So I said, explain to me why a molecular biologist wants to write software at the Central Bank of the Netherlands. Well, I hate living in a laboratory. I said, well, that's a good reason to write software at the Central Bank of the Netherlands, so I employed her. That conversation lasted no longer than, I think, 2 minutes. But if you know what your work delivers, what the added value is, why you are in this business, that helps so much to do relevant research. The only reason why I live is because people like you did an awesome job. And because people of you, I'm still here giving that presentation. And I learned a lot, and then I will wrap up. I learned a lot from the guy who did all that research on the bone marrow transplant. And one thing is for sure, he enjoyed working with patients because he knew what was necessary to never ever quit and to deal with all the disappointments that he had in his work. So that's my story. Thank you very much.